During my son's engagement party, when the whole family was raising glasses and taking photos, my granddaughter pulled at my sleeve and whispered with tears in her eyes, "Grandpa, you have to stop this." I heard something terrible. I bent down and looked at her face. She was 11 years old, and she had never looked that frightened in her life. What she told me next changed everything. 45 minutes later, the police were standing in my living room. Before I go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. My son Marcus. Wait, no. Let me start over. My son's name is Jonah. He's 31, works as a structural engineer for a firm outside of Charlotte, and until about 8 months ago, I would have told you he had the most solid head on his shoulders of anyone I'd raised. I say that as a man who spent 32 years in the Navy before retiring to a quiet house in Mooresville, North Carolina, where I grow tomatoes and fix things that don't need fixing just to stay busy. Jonah's mother, my wife Constance, passed 4 years ago from a stroke. It was the kind of loss that reorganizes everything. You don't recover from it. You just rearrange yourself around it and learn to keep going. Jonah took it hard. We both did. But he threw himself into work and eventually came back to himself. Or so I thought. He met Claire at a work conference in Raleigh last February. Told me about her on a Sunday phone call, the kind we've had every week since his mother died. He said she was from Ohio originally, worked in pharmaceutical sales, had a laugh that made the whole room turn around. I asked the usual questions. How long has she been in Charlotte? Does she have family here? What does she do on weekends? Jonah laughed and told me I sounded like I was filling out a background check form. Maybe I was. I met her for the first time at a dinner. Jonah hosted at his condo in March. She came in carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a smile that was calibrated to charm, the kind that says the right things at the right moments but never quite settles into warmth. She called me Mr. Aldridge, even after I asked her twice to call me Gene. She complimented Jonah constantly, but in a way that kept the spotlight on herself, the way someone praises a painting they want credit for discovering. After dinner, while Jonah was in the kitchen, she asked me 3 questions in a row about the house in Mooresville. How long had I owned it? Had I updated the kitchen? Was the neighborhood growing? I answered plainly and changed the subject. Later, driving home, I turned those questions over in my mind like stones, looking at what might be underneath them. I didn't say anything to Jonah. Not yet. He was happy in a way I hadn't seen since before Constance got sick, and I knew exactly what it would cost me to question it. By June, they were talking about moving in together. By July, she had a key to his condo. By September, Jonah called me on a Thursday night instead of our usual Sunday and said, "Dad, I'm going to ask Claire to marry me." I sat down at the kitchen table and chose my words the way you choose footing on ice. "You've known her 7 months, son." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I knew it when I knew it, Dad, same as you and Mom." I didn't have an answer for that. His mother and I got engaged after 9 months. I'd been outmaneuvered by my own history. Claire said yes on a Saturday evening at Lake Norman. Jonah sent me a photo of the two of them on the dock, her laughing into his shoulder, his face open and unguarded in a way that made my chest hurt. Not because I wasn't happy for him, because I recognized that kind of open face. It's what people wear when they're not protecting themselves. The engagement party was held at my house the first Saturday in October. Jonah wanted it at a restaurant downtown, but my daughter-in-law Sandra, Jonah's older sister's wife, offered to help me host, and I think Jonah knew it would mean something to have it at the family home, the house where he and his sister Margot grew up, where Constance had her garden out back. I spent 3 days getting the place ready. Sandra handled the food. My granddaughter Piper, Margot's daughter, 11 years old, sharp as a tack and never missed a thing, was staying the weekend with me. She followed me around the yard as I set up folding tables, asking questions about every plant, every photograph on the wall, every story behind every object. That kid had always been more interested in my life than most adults were. We had a deal. Her and I. If she ever had something real to say, she could always say it to me, no matter what it was. Claire's friends arrived early. 3 of them, 2 women and a man, all introduced vaguely as people from her pharmaceutical sales network. They dressed expensively and moved to the party like they were conducting an inspection rather than attending a celebration. One of them, the man, spent 20 minutes on the back porch alone. Another one kept gravitating toward the hallway where Constance's old writing desk sat, the one I'd kept exactly as she left it. The third woman asked Sandra where the bathroom was and was gone for a while longer than seemed necessary. I noticed all of it. I filed it away and kept smiling and pouring sweet tea. Jonah made a toast. He talked about his mother, about how she would have loved Claire, and I saw genuine tears on his face, and I pressed my jaw together and got through it. Claire stood beside him looking appropriately moved. Afterward, she caught me in the kitchen while I was refilling the ice bucket and touched my arm. "Jonah talks about you constantly," she said. "He says you're the most honest man he's ever known. I hope we can get there, you and I." I told her I hope so too. When she left the kitchen, I set down the ice bucket and stood there a moment. Something about it felt rehearsed. Not wrong exactly. Rehearsed. The party had been going about 2 hours when Piper found me. I was standing near the fireplace talking to my old neighbor Ted, who'd known Jonah since he was in Little League, when I felt a small hand wrap around my fingers and pull once, firmly. I looked down, and Piper's face stopped me cold. She'd been laughing and running around with the other kids not 20 minutes before. Now she looked the way she had at Constance's funeral, small and still and trying very hard to hold something together. I excused myself from Ted and crouched down next to her in the corner by the bookshelf. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" She looked past me to make sure no one was close. Then she leaned in and spoke right against my ear. "Grandpa, that man who came with Claire, he was out back on his phone and I was on the other side of the bushes getting my ball, and he didn't see me. He was talking about Uncle Jonah." She stopped, swallowed. "He said once it's signed, she'll have access to everything. The house too, if the old man cooperates." "Grandpa, I think he meant you." I kept my face still. That was a Navy training. 32 years of keeping your face still while your mind works. Did he say anything else? "He said a name, not Claire. A different name. He said, 'Tell Melissa everything's on schedule.'" I stood up slowly and looked across the room at Claire, who was laughing at something Jonah had said. One hand on his chest, the other wrapped around a champagne flute. Piper's hand was still in mine. "You did exactly right telling me," I said quietly. "Don't say a word to anyone else. Go find your mom and stay close to her for a little while, okay?" She nodded. She trusted me. That trust felt like the heaviest thing in the room. I spent the next 40 minutes doing something I'd learned to do in the service, acting perfectly normal while doing something else entirely in my head. I refilled drinks. I laughed at Ted's story about the time Jonah hit a baseball through his garage window in 2001. I shook hands with Claire's friends and asked pleasant, pointless questions, watching their eyes while they answered. The man from the back porch, Claire had introduced him as Garrett, an old friend from Columbus, had an energy that I now read differently. He wasn't relaxed, he was waiting. The way you wait when you got a plan running and you just need the timeline to hold. I slipped away to Constance's writing desk in the hallway. Her old laptop was in the bottom drawer, the one she used for her book club emails. I hadn't touched it in months. I opened the lid and typed a name into the search bar, Claire Donahue, Pharmaceutical Sales, Ohio. What came back was thin. Too thin for a woman in her mid-30s with a decade of sales experience. A LinkedIn profile that had been active 2 years ago and went quiet. No company pages, no endorsements after 2022, a single Facebook post from 3 years ago with a different last name under a tagged photo, Claire Voss, at what looked like a wedding. Her own wedding. I sat with that for a moment. Then I typed, Claire Voss, Ohio. Fraud. The third result down was a news article from the Columbus Dispatch, dated 14 months ago. The headline read, "Columbus Woman Sought in Connection with Elder Financial Fraud Scheme." The photo in the article was smaller than a thumbnail, but I'd been looking at that face for 8 months. It was Claire. Her legal name was Claire Voss. She and at least 2 associates had been investigated for a pattern that included romantic relationships with recently widowed professionals, rushed engagements, and the signing of financial and property documents under the guise of joint planning. One victim had signed over power of attorney. Another had added her to the deed of his home 6 weeks before a forged transfer document appeared. The investigation had stalled when she moved out of the state. I closed the laptop and sat in the hallway for a full minute. Above me on the wall was Constance's favorite photo of the 4 of us, me, her, Jonah, and Margot at Wrightsville Beach when the kids were maybe 10 and 7. I looked at it for a moment. Then I got up. Jonah was near the back door when I found him, talking to Ted's wife. I touched his elbow lightly and said, "Can I borrow you for 2 minutes? I need help with something in the garage." He could hear something in my voice. He excused himself immediately. In the garage, with the door closed, I told him everything. Piper's conversation, the name Melissa, the Columbus Dispatch article. I showed him the photo on my phone, the one from the article. I watched his face move through disbelief, resistance, and then a slow, awful recognition. "She told me she'd been in Charlotte for 3 years. He said quietly, "I know. She said she'd never been married. I know." He sat down on the workbench where he used to sit as a teenager when he wanted to talk without his mother hearing. He put his hands on his knees and stared at the floor. "Dad." His voice broke slightly. "She asked me last week to add her to my bank account. Said it would make planning the wedding easier, paying vendors." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Did you?" "Not yet. I had an appointment at the bank set for Monday." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "What about the insurance policy?" I asked. Jonah had a good life insurance policy through his firm. He'd updated it after his mother passed. He shook his head. "She mentioned it once. Asked if I'd thought about updating my beneficiaries. I said I hadn't gotten around to it yet." He looked up at me. "I thought she was just being responsible. She was being strategic." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, I could hear laughter from the party. Someone had put music on, the sounds of an ordinary celebration carrying through the garage wall. "What do we do?" he finally asked. "We go back in there," I said. "We act normal. And I make a phone call." I called the non-emergency line for the Ardell County Sheriff's Office and explained the situation as clearly as I could. Active fraud investigation in Columbus. Subject was in my home. Names of associates present. Potential ongoing scheme. The dispatcher transferred me to a detective on call. I gave her the article. The name Claire Voss. The details Piper had overheard. She said she'd make contact with Columbus PD and have someone there within the hour. She told me to keep the gathering going and not to confront anyone. Jonah and I went back inside through the side door. The next hour was the longest of my retirement. I moved through my own house like an actor who'd forgotten half his lines but knew he had to stay on stage. Claire found me in the kitchen and asked if I needed any help. I told her Sandra had it covered and thanked her warmly. Garrett caught my eye from across the room at one point, and I gave him the flat, easy nod of a man with nothing on his mind. He looked away first. Jonah was remarkable. I don't say that lightly. He went back to Claire's side and held her hand and smiled at things she said, and I could see what it cost him. Every minute of it. He was his mother's son in that moment, all the way through. Piper materialized at my side around the 40-minute mark and slipped her hand into mine without saying anything. I squeezed it once. "Is it gonna be okay?" she murmured. "It's gonna be okay," I said. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at the front door at 7:14 p.m. They were in plain clothes, introduced themselves as guests looking for the address next door, asked if they could come in. I stepped back and let them through. What happened next took about 4 minutes. The lead detective crossed the room to where Claire stood with Jonah, showed her a badge, and said her name, her real name, Claire Voss. The room went very quiet. Garrett moved toward the back door instinctively. The second officer was already there. The two women who'd come with them had already slipped out, which I'd half expected, and which I'd mentioned to the detective when I called. Claire didn't run. She went very still instead, the way water goes still before it freezes. She looked at Jonah, and for just a second her expression shifted. Not remorse exactly, more like calculation, figuring out whether there was still a play to make. There wasn't. Jonah stepped back and let the detective do her work. He looked at the floor when they cuffed her. I watched him and felt the particular heartbreak of watching your child go through something you couldn't take from them, no matter how much you wanted to. She was led out through the front door, past Constance's rose bushes by the porch steps that I'd pruned back 2 weeks ago for winter. The guest who remained watched in silence. Ted's wife put her arm around Sandra. Margot pulled Piper in close. I stood on the porch after the car pulled away until the taillights disappeared. Jonah came out a few minutes later and stood beside me. The October air had gone cold, the way it does in North Carolina once the sun drops that particular sharp edge to it that always meant football season and the end of things. I keep thinking about all the things I told her, he said. About Mom, about the house, about you. He shook his head. She asked so many questions about you, Dad, about your retirement, your savings. I just thought she was trying to get to know the family. That's exactly what she wanted you to think. He was quiet. A neighbor's dog barked down the street. I almost signed that bank form, he said. Almost. He turned and looked at me. His eyes were red, and he was holding it together by a thread, the way men do when they've been raised to believe. Holding it together means something. I'm sorry I didn't listen when you had that look. You know, your look. What look is that? The one Mom used to call your submarine look. Like you've gone beneath the surface and you're just running silent. I laughed, quietly. The first real one in hours. He had his mother's memory for detail. We went back inside. Sandra had quietly helped the remaining guests gather their things, and the house was nearly empty by the time we came through the door. The food was still on the tables. The champagne Jonah had opened for the toast was half finished on the counter. The engagement party decorations, the simple white lights Sandra had strung along the mantel, were still on, and in that empty house they looked less like celebration and more like something that needed to be turned off. Margot hugged her brother for a long time without saying anything. Piper sat on the couch with her legs folded under her, watching the room with those old eyes she had. She found out the important things, Jonah said at one point, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. But she didn't find out the most important things. What do you mean? Margot asked. He looked at me. She didn't know that Dad had a network, that he'd spent 30 years learning to read people who were trying to hide what they meant. She didn't know that Piper was in those bushes. He almost smiled. And she didn't know that the most dangerous person at this party was an 11-year-old girl. From the couch, Piper straightened slightly and tried not to look pleased with herself. I found out later from the detective that Claire Voss, the name she'd used in Ohio, though she'd used at least 2 others, had been operating variations of the same scheme for nearly 5 years, targeting recently widowed or divorced professionals in mid-sized cities, moving every 18 months or so when investigations got too close. The 2 women who'd come to the party were associates. Garrett had a record of his own. The name Melissa, the one Piper had overheard, belonged to a 4th person authorities were still looking for. 3 prior victims had come forward after the Columbus article. One man had lost the deed to his home. Another had drained his 401k. The third had been elderly, and I don't say more about his situation than that it was bad. Jonah canceled the bank appointment himself on Monday morning. He changed the beneficiary on his insurance policy back to Margot and me. He deleted the contact information, changed his phone number, and spent the following 2 weeks very quietly, working long hours and coming over for dinner on Sundays again. We didn't talk much about Claire directly. We talked about other things. His mother, football. Whether I was finally going to fix the gutters on the north side of the house, which I had been putting off for 2 years. Slowly, the Sunday calls came back to feeling like themselves. In December, Piper and I put up Constance's Christmas decorations together, the ones I'd kept in the same boxes in the same order since 1987. She asked about each one, and I told her the story behind every single thing she held up. The ceramic cardinal Constance had bought in a gift shop in Asheville, the wooden star Jonah had painted in 2nd grade, the small brass nativity that had been my mother's. At one point, Piper held up an old ornament, a simple glass ball, pale blue, with a small chip near the top. "What's the story behind this one?" "That one your grandmother found at a yard sale in 1993. Paid $1/4 for it. Said she liked it because it wasn't perfect." Piper turned it over in her hands carefully, then hung it on the branch closest to her. "I like being the one who heard things," she said, not looking at me, still arranging the ornament. "I was scared, but I'm glad I said something." "You should always say something," I told her. "When it matters, you say it, no matter what." She nodded, satisfied, and reached into the box for the next ornament. Outside, the neighborhood was going dark and quiet the way it does on December evenings in North Carolina, porch lights coming on one by one down the street. Inside, the Christmas tree was filling up slowly with 30 years of ordinary things that turned out to mean everything. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe to Velveten Revenge for more. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have trusted your gut in that situation, or would you have given her the benefit of the doubt? I read every single one. And to hear the next story, click the box on the right. Thank you for being here. I've thought about that October evening more times than I can count. Not the dramatic part at the end, not the handcuffs or the squad car pulling away from the curb. I think about the 45 minutes before that, the part where I had to act like everything was fine when nothing was fine. That's the part that stayed with me. There's a version of that night where I don't listen to Piper, where I tell myself she's 11 and probably misheard, where I weigh the cost of being wrong against the cost of being wrong and decide the risk isn't worth it. I've played that version out in my head. Jonah signs the bank form Monday morning, adds Claire to his account as a matter of convenience because he trusts her and wants to make the planning easier. Then, somewhere in Mexico or the next city over, he discovers what she actually was. And I have to live with the fact that I heard something and chose to dismiss it. The choices we make in the moment before we're sure, those are the ones that define us. Not the easy calls, not the decisions where the answer is obvious. The ones where you have a half-heard conversation from a bush, a name that doesn't fit, a feeling in your chest that could be instinct or could be paranoia, and you have to decide which one to trust. What I've come to believe, after 60-plus years of watching people, is that intelligence without honesty is just a sharper tool for causing harm. Claire was intelligent, she was organized, patient, and she understood people well enough to mirror back exactly what they wanted to see. But she used all of that in service of something hollow, and that's the thing about a person who builds their life on deception. Every structure they raise is load-bearing on a lie. Eventually, the foundation gives. Jonah had all the same warning signs with Claire that I'd had and failed to articulate in time. The rushed timeline, the questions about assets, the way her friends moved through a house like they were calculating square footage. He saw them too, I think, somewhere underneath the happiness. He just wanted to believe the feeling in his chest was love and not alarm. That's not weakness, that's being human. The discipline is in learning to sit with both feelings at the same time, to let yourself be hopeful and still keep your eyes open. Piper already knows that. She's 11, and she already knows it better than most adults I've met. She heard something that scared her, and instead of deciding it wasn't her place to say anything, she came and found me. That took courage that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from being raised to believe your voice matters and from trusting that the person you bring it to won't dismiss you. I'd like to think I earned that trust. I'd like to think the years of listening to her, of telling her she could always say the hard thing to me, meant something when it counted. The ornament she hung on the tree that December, the pale blue one with the small chip near the top, The one Constance found at a yard sale for a quarter, that's the one I look at now every Christmas. Not because it's beautiful, because it isn't perfect, and it's still there, still doing its job, still catching the light. That's what I think about when I think about what held this family together that night. Not perfection, just honesty, and the willingness to speak it out loud even when your hands are shaking. That's worth more than anything else I can think of to leave behind.